Around 2 years ago, I made my very first video on this channel, my GOAT guide on zombies, and looking back I think it holds up decently well. Also, before I continue, I would like to thank the nearly 2,000 people who watched that video, as it's the one most popular to this day. Now 2 years later, I feel it's once more time to venture into the underworld and commune with the dead, as we take a look at Diva/Synchro zombies from Edison format. So one thing to note is that zombies as a deck never really went away between GOAT and Edison, with the version I showcased from GOAT essentially existing in some form for the next couple of years, receiving new support every few sets, both directly and indirectly. Now granted, from 2005 to 2007, the deck was somewhat pushed to the side, in favour of decks like Trooper, Cyber Dragon and of course Monarchs, but never stopped being a fan favourite. That wasn't until 2008, when two things led to zombies once more rising from the grave to become a dominant force in Yu-Gi-Oh! Once again. The first being the creation of Telidad, a deck focused around Dark Armed Dragon, Psychic Monsters and Synchro Summoning. Dominating much of 2008, Dark Armed Dragon decks would undergo many transformations over the year, and eventually people realised how well the zombie engine fit in with this deck strategy. Which leads me to the second reason for the deck's resurgence, Card of Safe Return, which made zombies one of the best draw engines in the entire game's history, and it also helped matters that they're one of the best decks at spamming out synchros, something that dad decks already wanted to do. So for the next few years, these zombie dad decks would come to be a rogue threat in the game, so falling into obscurity with the banning of Card of Safe Return. That wasn't until 2022, when a bunch of Edison players realised that even though the deck no longer had its main draw engine, it still possessed the ability to swarm the field, make big synchros, and recover the next turn if needed, and thus zombies once more rose from the grave to dominate Yu-Gi-Oh! So let's take a look at what crawled back from the dead with Edison zombies. So let's begin this look at Edison zombies with an old favourite from GOAT format ironically in Pyramid Turtle. A level 4 zombie, Pyramid Turtle, upon being destroyed by battle, can special summon any zombie from our deck with 2,000 or less defense points, which those who don't know, basically means they can search 9% of any good zombies at the time, as one of the key traits of zombies in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is their very low defense stats. In fact, in the standard version of this deck, this monster can literally search every zombie we play, from the key playmakers like Plague Spreader Zombie and Zombie Master, to other recruiters like Goblin Zombie, making this card one of the key cards of this strategy. So yes, 5 years on and Turtle is as good as ever. Not many cards can say that, so praise to this guy. Now Pyramid Turtle is somehow still an amazing recruiter despite his age, but as we're all aware, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is built on power creep, so coming in next we have the newer, shinier searcher in Goblin Zombie. A level 4 Dark Zombie, the Goblin allows us to add any zombie with 1200 or less defense from our deck to our hand. Now yes, this card doesn't give us an immediate monster on board like Turtle does, and yes, it technically has a lower amount of monsters it can search, which occasionally does come up. However, this card has one advantage over Turtle that makes it one of the best recruiters we've had in a while. That being that it doesn't matter how this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, it will still trigger. This means that unlike Pyramid Turtle, Goblin Zombie makes for ideal synchro material, as we can use him with our level 2 tuner to make a Goyo Guardian for example, and then regain some of our resources we used immediately. Also, like Turtle, this effect is not once per turn, so if we have multiples on board we can very easily synchro climb, or summon multiple level 6 synchros, and gain resources afterwards. Rounding off our searches, we have the always useful SANGAN, which is still in its pre-errata version here, meaning if it's sent from field to the graveyard it can add any monster with 1500 attack or less to the hand with no drawback. Not only does this allow us to add pretty much every zombie we've mentioned so far from other searchers to play extenders, but this card also allows us to access to additional engines we throw into the deck, from titular Deep Sea Diva to potential Psychic engine. Basically anything you need, SANGAN has you covered. So we've seen our searchers, now what are we actually searching for? Well, first up we have one of the most powerful tuners in the early Synchro era, Plague Spreader Zombie. A level 2 tuner, Zombie has the ability to revive itself from the graveyard by putting one card from your hand back on top of the deck. Now being a level 2 tuner that is searchable by a multitude of cards is already extremely good, and one of the reasons this card was one of the best cards in the late 2000s. However, what makes this card so good in this format is that revival effects, as this one can allow us to access every synchro in our deck from levels 5 to 8, as if you want a higher level synchro, you can use this card in level 3 or 4 and then bring it back to synchro climb. Now as this deck's main goal is bring out big synchros with level 2 tuner, we also need a lot of good level 4 monsters to go along with it. We've already seen some with Goblin and Turtle, and to add on to this we have Mizuki, A level 4 Earth zombie, Mizuki can banish itself from the graveyard to revive a zombie from the grave. Another way to spam out synchros, what makes Mizuki so powerful is that there's no once per turn effect at all on him, whether soft or hard, meaning that if you have multiples of this card in grave, you can potentially make humongous plays for the error, and you could also cycle hit the one copy with cards like Burial from a Different Dimension for even more plays. Along with Plague Spreader, Mizuki is one of the easiest ways we have to synchro climb in this deck, easily giving us access to level 6s with Plague once, 8s with Plague twice, and even 5s with the likes of Diva, Plague and Spirit Reaper. Speaking of which, next in our zombie horde we have this, one last holdover from Cult format in the form of the hand-ripping, attack-absorbing, hard-to-kill Spirit Reaper. A level 3 zombie, Reaper can be killed in battle, making him a pretty good wall that can tank hits for a few turns while we set up our big plays. Now yes, he will die immediately upon being targeted, but like I said in my GOAT guide, if any opponent wants to waste the cards on a Creeble step monster, fine. In addition to this, Reaper can also, when doing damage, rip a card of the opponent's hand. Now yes, this doesn't like to happen too often, but there are situations where your synchros can clear the field effectively enough that Reaper can get in for a little bit of damage and drop your opponent down by one card, put them way behind an advantage and making you have to make a comeback. Now our final zombie is by far the most powerful at this time, and while I understand why, I feel it's a bit of a shame he's fallen out of favour so much compared to his good buddy Mizuki, so let's give an undead welcome to Zombie Master. A level 4 Dark, Zombie Master has a soft once per turn, can pitch any card in your hand, and then summon a zombie monster from either player's graveyard. So as you can imagine, 9 times out of 10 this card is the one we want to normal summon in this deck, as he's one of the best combo enablers we have. Obviously pitching a Plague for a Goblin is ideal, as it's instant level 6 synchro along with shuffling away a bad card. However, this card can also be used to set up Mizuki plays, and even more interestingly, you can grave rob your opponent's graveyard if you control Zombie World, which is another engine we can play in this deck. Overall, yes, Mizuki is far the better card, but Zombie Master is one of the most powerful zombies of this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! And believe it or not, that's it for the core zombie engine in this zombie deck. Yes, surprisingly for a deck called Diva Zombies, the undead do actually make up a large part of it. That being said, there are definitely other zombies you can add for the flavour if you choose to. First up in that category is one of my personal favourites, Ill Blood, a Gemini zombie that after being summoned twice, can summon a zombie from your hand or either player's graveyard once a turn. So essentially, though slow, this card is a functionally better Zombie Master, and I personally love playing this card, though I don't understand why it's not a mainstay in this deck. Because 1, it is very slow, requiring a minimum of 2 turns to use its effect, and 2, if it's destroyed, it takes all the zombies it revived along with it, making it just about the biggest target for removal you could run. That being said, if you do want to have more revival in this deck, or like running the Zombie World engine, I would recommend giving this card a try. Next up we have Red Eyes Zombie Dragon, which is a zombie version of the OG Red Eyes, duh. Sharing the stats and level of the original Red Eyes, Zombie Dragon has 2 effects. Firstly, it can be tribute summoned for only 1 tribute if you sacrifice a zombie, which as we've seen isn't very hard in this deck. And this makes it a good beta for the deck, however it's its other effect that makes it see play in certain builds of this deck. That being that when this card destroys a zombie in battle, it can summon that zombie to your side of the field. Now as you can imagine, this means this card is only played in Zombie World variants of the deck that can transform all the opponent's monsters into zombies. However, if you are playing that brew, this card is a must, as it allows you to take opposing tuners for your own synchro summons, steal big beaters from the opponent, and prevent some graveyard effects like Treeborn Frog. Literally, the only downside to this build is that Red Eyes is a level 7, making it bad for synchro summoning, but that's not much of a trade for all this power, and that's mostly it for zombies here. If you want more niche options, I'd recommend watching the E3 Yu-Gi-Oh video on synchro zombies, which I'll link in the description. Next up, we have the other half of this deck's namesake in Deep Sea Diva, a card so good it even still sees some play in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Over a decade later. The other level 2 tuner of this deck, Diva has the ability that on normal summon, she can special summon a Sea Serpent level 3 or lower from the deck, which in the standard build of this deck will always be another copy of itself. Much like Plague Spreader Zombie, this card is another way to facilitate synchro summoning level 6 or lower monsters, and synchro climbing into higher level monsters with 2 of them. Again, this makes it a great way to get Goblin, Zombie and Mizuki into the graveyard, and a way of thinning the deck a little as well. Now granted, she's not as important to the deck as her name in the title whatever you suggest, because she can't be searched and you have to rely on drawing her, but she's still a damn good card. Now this deck is called Diva Zombies, however as we've seen, this engine makes up only around a third of this deck at most, leaving us a large amount of monster card slots to fill. Now like I said, this deck is a descendant from Zombie Teledad, and as such yes, we're still running Darkham Dragon in this deck, because not only is he a massive beater, he has one of the best effects in the game at this point. You see, he needs exactly 3 darks in the grave to summon him, and can then banish dark from your grave to destroy 1 card on the field. Keep in mind this effect is not once per turn, and Yu-Gi-Oh still has priority at this point, meaning unless they have Solemn Judgment, your opponent can't do much to stop this guy from popping at least 1 of their cards. Now with the amount of darks we run in this deck, filling the graveyard for Dark Arm Dragon is no problem, but what makes him particularly good in this deck is how easy it is to manipulate the graveyard with cards like Plague Spreader and Mizuki, meaning that unlike other dad decks, a late Dark Arm Dragon is not difficult at all to achieve in Zombies, which can be absolutely terrifying when both you and your opponents are low on resources. Next in our Dark lineup is arguably the best trait monster in Edison format, in Caius the Shadow Monarch. In addition to its massive Monarch stats, Caius upon tribute summon banishes 1 card from the field, and if it's a dark monster it burns the opponent for 1000 points of damage. Now the obvious benefits of a massive beater that banishes anything on summon and burns are obvious, but what makes this card even better in Zombies is there's another way to trigger Goblin Zombie, and also a way of getting Plague Spreaders and Mizukis into the graveyard. So a big body with removal attached that can do burn damage and potentially trigger some of the best cards in your deck. What's not to love about this card? Finally, in our non-zombie dark package, we have Gorz the Emissary of Darkness and Tragodia, 2 of the first hand traps to see competitive viability in Yu-Gi-Oh! Both being able to summon themselves when you take damage, Gorz being when you control no monsters, these 2 utterly changed how combat worked in Yu-Gi-Oh! You see, Gorz on summon will bring a token along with him, which has stats equal to the amount of damage you took, and because of this, players would always attack lowest to highest in terms of damage out of fear of a Gorz, until the card eventually got power crept out of the game. Tragodia, meanwhile, has points equal to 600 times the number of cards in your hand, but makes up for that usually lower amount of attack points if it stays on the field. You see, for a discard of a monster, Tragodia can target a card the opponent controls with the same level and take control of it, which makes it another way of dumping Mizuki and Plague Spreader that, like Ill Blood, can also be used to steal important cards like generic synchros, tuners, and big threats from our opponents. So while she's not as famous as Gorz, she can be even better than him given the right circumstances. Finally in our monster lineup, we need to play some cards to help us dump more zombies into the graveyard. Now if you want, this can be Card Trooper, as not only can it mill you 3 cards, but it will also draw you a card on destruction. However, a more popular option is a small Light Swan engine consisting of Raikou and sometimes Lila, as not only can they mill you just as well as Trooper can, but they also provide removal, with Raikou being able to pop anything once, and Lila being a slow way to pop back row several times. When it comes to our extra deck, there isn't too much special here to talk about, so I'll be brief. In terms of level 8 synchros, we have Stardust Dragon for protection and Colossal Fighter for damage. We also have Goyo Guardian to steal things, and Brionac Dragon of the Ice Barrier to bounce multiple things, because this is the pre-errata version. We also have Black Rose Dragon for board wipes, and Magical Android to gain life. The more interesting cards we have in this deck are the 2 Plague Spreader synchros in Hades and Doomkaiser Dragon, with Hades basically giving every zombie in your deck the effect of the regular Dark Wheel Hades, making them all pseudo floodgates, and the Kaiser being a pretty big beater that gets much more powerful with Zombie World. Moving on to our spells, let's begin with a classic from the GOAT days in Creature Swap, which is exactly what it says on the tin and forces each player to swap one of their monsters, essentially letting us take a potentially big monster, like in the best case scenarios like Goyo Guardian or Stardust Dragon, while giving out a point or a creature we can run over to gain more card advantage. Next up in the cup from our reunion tour, we have Book of Life, and like Swap, this is a card that arguably got better as the years went on. A normal spell, Book revives a zombie from our grave, then banishes a monster from the opponent's graveyard. Not obviously the Monster Reborn effect is as good as it was in GOAT, but with the game's increased use of the graveyard over the next 6 years, I'd argue the banish effect is now just as important, as opposed to an afterthought like it was in GOAT. Again, good for the mirror, Book also helps keep Dark Arm Dragon at bay, it gets rid of Stardust Dragons using your turn, and can also banish cards like Treeborn Frog from the graveyard, along with many other powerful uses. Definitely a really good card, and one that got a lot better in Edison. Speaking of books from Pharaonic Guardian, we next have Book of Moon, a card that is bafflingly still at 3 in this format. A quick play spell, Book flips any monster face down. A simple effect, one that has so much versatility in this format, whether it's used on our monsters or the opponents. If used on your own monsters, we can dodge removal like Mirror Force, and we can reuse the effects like Raikou's. However, it's even better used on the opponent. Firstly, this card can by itself shut down synchro plays by turning down either tuners or non-tuners, often leaving the opponent with a very bad field. In addition to this, we can also use Book to blank attacks and beat up monsters with weak defense, like Dad and the Monarchs. Like I said, Book is a very simple card, but there's a reason this card has seen play for years, and so does to this day. Outside of these cards, the rest of our spells are one-offs, and a mixture of staples and synergistic cards. First up we have Allure of Darkness, which lets us draw 2 cards as long as we banish a dark monster. Make sure you have one in your hand before you do this, otherwise you've got to discard your entire hand. In a deck full of dark monsters like Dad and Caius, this is a no-brainer to include, as not only does it let us see more cards from our deck, but also late game lets us banish some dead cards, like extra copies of Ghouls or dead Dark Armed Dragons. Up next we have Burial from a Different Dimension, a quick play that returns up to 3 banished monsters to the graveyard. I already explained how vital Mizuki is for this strategy, so having 1 to 3 more copies of him is really good. For the same reason we run Foolish Burial, because another way to dump cards like Mizuki, Plague Spreader, etc. is an amazing thing in this deck. And rounding off this deck we have staples like Heavy Storm, Brain Control and Mind Control, and you have a spell lineup that's as terrifying as the zombies themselves. Finally, looking at the traps for this deck, there honestly isn't too much to say, as we pretty much just run stock staples. Mirror Force and Deep Prison are here acting as our battle traps, and are some of the best removal in the format. Nothing much new to say here other than watch out for Deep Prison yourself when playing this deck, as one of the best ways to deal with this strategy is to banish either a Mizuki or Mizuki target, and limit the deck's recursive aspect. In much of the same way, Bottomless Trap was also great in the mirror match, as well as against many other graveyard focused decks, as it can also banish cards like Mizuki and Zombie Master. However, this is a card that we often can use better than our opponents, because most of our monsters are actually below this card's point threshold, as opposed to decks like Hero and Monarchs for example. Finally, in our removal suite we have Torrential Tribute, which at worst will wipe the field clean for both of us, leaving us the chance to rebuild our field first. However, in this deck it can also be used for so much more, because if used right it can be a massive tempo swing. Here's a list of what this card can do for us other than just board wipe. It can set up the graveyard for Mizuki and Necro Gardener. It can set up Plague Spreader plays after the field is clear. It can give Spirit Reaper an open board to attack and rip a card from our opponent's hand. It can set up Dark Armed Dragon plays, and of course it can trigger Goblin Zombie. Not bad from an old card for 2003. Now that's it for the widely played removal, however recent zombie builds have also taken a playing copy of Phoenix Wing Wind Blast as well, as not only will this card stack the opponent's deck, but the discard can also help us fill up the graveyard for our usual plays of Plague Spreader, Mizuki, etc. Next up we have Call of the Haunted, going to have more revival in this deck. Rounding off our traps we have Solemn Judgment, Starlight Road and Royal Oppression. In conclusion, despite all the major advancements made in the strategy between Ghost and Edison, it's interesting to see how zombies as a deck remain in the same place meta-wise, not being the best deck but always being a major contender that can upset the format's juggernaut if given a chance. I said in the Goat Guide that this was one of my favourite decks of all time, and that's still true here. Thank you all for watching this video and I'll see you guys in the next one.